Welcome back to Franchi Talks Asian Arts. Oh, finally I'm making a new video. I am so happy to be here. Today's video, actually, it's a continuation of a series which I've been working on for the last year. It's a series about flowers and plants in Japanese art. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you may remember that we have already talked about the plants and flowers of autumn, winter and spring, which are often found in Japanese art. And today I want to conclude this series and talk about the plants and flowers of summer. Now I know that it's not summer anymore, unfortunately. I started writing this video weeks ago and I thought I would be done faster, and it took me a while instead. But I don't really want to wait one whole year to film the video. I just kind of want to conclude the series. So let's all play a game, or do me a favor. Imagine that it's summer. So let's close our eyes, imagine the heat of the sun on our skin. Let's hear the sound of the cicadas. You done it? Okay then. Let's go ahead and let's jump right in. The first plant that we're going to talk about today is the convolvulus, which is more commonly known as morning glory. The morning glory is a kind of vine plant. The bush can grow up to 3 meters tall and it flowers beautifully in summer. Its flowers are kind of trumpet shaped and they bloom in the colors of white, pink, lilac and also purple and blue. The name morning glory stems from the fact that the flowers open up in the morning and then they close again at night. And the Japanese also gave it a name that's tied to this habit, and it is the Asagao, which literally translates as a morning face. And morning face, this name lends itself to a perfect play on words, which was often used in art. We can look at an example of play on word, which is a woodblock print by Kikukawa Eizan. Eizan depicts a morning glory. In the main, he depicts a beautiful woman who has just woken up. It's just the morning. She is looking at herself in the mirror. She's holding a cloth. And we can imagine that she's getting ready to go about her day. In fact, we think that she's putting makeup on because you can see on the bottom left a little package. This is makeup powder. The relation to the morning glory plant and this kind of plant is actually more explicitly found at the top of the print, because actually we can see two cards depicted and one of them shows a plant of morning glory and a poem dedicated to the plant as well. The name of this woodblock print, Asagao, doesn't only work with this play on words about the fact of the flower, the morning glory, and the woman who's just woken up, a morning glory, but actually it adds a third layer of reference, and this reference is from the tale of Genji. Now, the tale of Genji, Genji Monogatari, in case you don't know, is an epic novel which was written in the 11th century by a court lady named Murasaki Shikibu. This novel is considered the first novel in the world, and it was massively popular, and throughout the ages, throughout the century, it has influenced Japanese art very deeply, and there's loads of references and themes of this novel in Japanese art. And this is the case for our woodblock print as well. In fact, it is this whole series of prints by Kikukawa Eizan is named Eastern Figures Matched with the Tale of Genji. So this is it's quite openly a reference, it's not hidden in any way. The way this worked was that often in Japanese art a technique called mitate was used. Mitate worked by using a subject and using it as a symbol, a kind of simulacrum for something else. So, especially in the Edo period, common everyday people would be represented in art and used in a way to represent more noble people or legendary heroes, for example. In our case, we see a beautiful woman, like a traditional Edo period beauty, and she stands there as a reference, as a symbol of the ladies of the imperial court during the Heian period. And she stands specifically for one woman who was also called Asagao. This woman is a fictional character from the tale of Genji. She appears in the 20th chapter especially. And the story of this lady is that the prince Genji is infatuated with her, and he tries throughout the book, well, not throughout the whole book, but through the chapters various times to create a relationship with her. And in the 20th chapter, he decides to write her a letter, and attached to the letter, he sends a morning glory, a blooming morning glory flower. This was quite typical at the time to send letters to each other, attaching various blooming branches and flowers, a beautiful habit. And when Asagao receives the letter, she still decides to refuse him. And this is because she knows of the pain that Genji caused to other women that fell in love with him. So, not the happiest love story after all. We mentioned that Asagao is actually the focus, the title of a whole chapter of the book. The book has 54 chapters, so it is believed that another 50 prints could have existed in this series, however only 4 are known. It is not entirely clear whether the other 50 have all disappeared or if they never came to light. Maybe it was like a plan that wasn't executed, I am not sure. Now, the fact that Genji gives a morning glory to Asagao tells us something, which is that in the 11th century, morning glories were already appreciated. And in fact, morning glories were introduced from China during the 8th century, and they started being cultivated. And they continue being cultivated throughout the centuries. Now, if we do move a little jump and we talked about the early 19th century, that's when cultivation became kind of intense, and especially there was a kind of selection of the best flowers and a creation of the most beautiful plants, which were then sold. It was a growth for commercial purposes. And in fact, in the half of the 19th century, a special market for morning glories appeared in the Iriya area in Tokyo. We can see a depiction of the Iriya morning glory market in a woodblock print by Ogata Gekko. This print is dated to 1901, so actually it's the Meiji period. Ogata Gekko, as an artist, was famous for his woodblock prints, for his depictions, for example, of the First Sino-Japanese War. But he wasn't limited to that. He also loved to depict the subjects of everyday life in his ever more modernizing city, which was Edo, Tokyo. And we can see one of these depictions in this woodblock print. In fact, Gekko he represents this flower market in I think a beautiful summer morning. This is the kind of time that I imagine, I suppose, that the woodblock print is taking place. And we see a group of women who is amongst the flowers. I think they're choosing which one to buy. In fact, you can see there is a variety of colors. Now, Gekko depicts this scene in his own style. In fact, well, just like the rest of his production, because Ogata Gekko was never formally trained. He was never the apprentice of another woodblock print artist, which is a very rare thing in Japan. Generally, most craftsmen, most artists train with another artist in their studio. And because he didn't receive this formal training, he kind of developed a unique style. And his style is characterized by a kind of colors which seem to have been applied with brush strokes, and sometimes they even take on a kind of watercolor-like texture and appearance. We can see this kind of watercolory appearance, for example, on the left side, under the feet of the man, there is this kind of grayish area. Or otherwise on the right, near the tree and the plant pots, if we look closely, one of the plant pots seems to be almost transparent, like we can see the different layers of color, just like watercolor is often applied in layers. However, so keep it in mind, I'm making this metaphor, but this is still a woodblock print, 100%. So we can see that this kind of more shaded style has been applied to the landscape, to the location, but it was not applied when depicting the protagonist, the people. In fact, they are actually quite well defined. A black line has been used to define their contours, and they are also fully colored with kind of bright, solid colors. In general, the print has kind of light colors, and it's very bright and summery. I think it really well depicts this kind of atmosphere of a everyday or any day summer morning. The morning glories were also a favorite of an Edo period poet, Fukuda Chiyoni, also known as Kaga no Chiyo. Kaga no Chiyo was an incredibly popular poetess. She started writing at the age of 7, but by the age of 17 she was already famous and incredibly popular. And she is the protagonist of a woodblock print by Utagawa Kuniyoshi. Kuniyoshi is famous for his rendition of incredible characters, bigger than life, so heroes, mythical creatures, protagonists of legends, samurai, incredibly beautiful women, courtesans. And what I like about his style is that he always seems to represent these characters kind of in the moment. As an action is happening, it's as if a picture was taken of them just mid-action. And he kind of represents Kaga no Chiyo the same way. He represents Kaga no Chiyo on a morning when she is going to fetch water. She was walking to the well, but Kuniyoshi represents her as she has just stopped. And while she has stopped, her textile of the ropes almost feel like they're still moving. They're very dynamic and full of curves. They are also beautifully decorated. Kunyoshi was the son of a textile dyer, so we can imagine that he had kind of a good eye for textiles, and perhaps it's something that he also enjoyed. Why has Kaga no Chiyo stopped? She is looking down at a bucket which has been completely entwined by morning glories. Her face expresses surprise at this situation, but she also seems delighted. She appears to be smiling. And she must have deemed this moment special because, in fact, it was the inspiration for one of her most famous poems. It reads, "Morning glory, the well bucket entangled. I will ask for water." What she is saying in this poem is that as she goes to the well to fetch water, the well bucket has been entangled by the vines of the morning glory, and her reaction to it is to not bother the plant. She decides to leave it alone because I think she enjoys this development. And so she decides, I'll just go ask for water. She will go to someone else and say, "Hey, do you have some water for me?" Which a very wholesome image to think of. This poem is in the format typical of her production, which was hokku. These poems consisted of 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables, and it was a format which had developed in the 17th century. The poems also usually contain a kind of seasonal word, or in general an element which makes us think of one moment in time. And today we actually call these poems haiku. Kaga no Chiyo wrote beautiful hokku, which were also inspired by the work of one of the most, if not the most famous poet of the time who was Matsuo Basho, and often the two have been compared. She shared with him what has been described as a humble attitude of warm awareness towards the world, and a preference for a simple, easy life, which means that for both of them the inspiration for their poetry was in everyday things and nature. And this attitude is perfectly embodied in the poem about the morning glories and is materialized in this woodblock print by Kuniyoshi. We have been talking about the morning glories for a while, I admit it, but let's look at one last object with this flower. It is a beautiful summer kimono from the Meiji period. This kimono is of a style called hito-e, which is a very light kimono worn in summer or in general when it's warm, about let's say above 25 degrees. We can look at it, it's stunningly beautiful, and no doubt it was the work of a very skilled textile worker. And it features a decoration with a motif of morning glories, lotus flowers, and carps. We can find the morning glories towards the top of the kimono. They span from the back onto the sleeves, and they're depicted very delicately. We can see how thin the stems are. And they are represented mostly in white and they kind of stand out against this blue background. This effect was achieved by using a specific technique, that of resist dyeing, which means that a paste was applied onto the textile, forming a pattern, in our case the one of the morning glories, of course. The textile was then dyed, and once the dyeing process was finished, the paste was taken off, revealing the pattern still in white. And then the morning glories were finished up with some paint, I think, to kind of add a little bit of detail. Other effects were achieved with the dyeing process. For example, if we look at the sleeves, at the end extremity of the sleeves, we can see some very light shading with the blue, a very delicate effect, which was achieved by brushing the dye onto the sleeves. And if we focus for a second onto the blue areas, we can see that there is a kind of second layer to the decoration, because we can see a pattern of goldfish and waves, which has actually been weaved into the textile. So it kind of seems like not applied onto, but it's in the textile itself. It's a kind of a different layer, and it's very, very beautiful. And this would have not been easy to achieve. It certainly required very high skills. And so now I'm kind of thinking of the decoration of this kimono as in layers, or perhaps let's say achieved by distinct methods. So we've seen the morning glories with the resist dyeing, we've seen the goldfish with the weaving, and now let's look at the lotus flowers and the carps. These are towards the bottom of the kimono. They create this kind of third layer, and they are also beautifully depicted. They were achieved by using paint. So they were painted onto the textile, and we can admire how pristinely and how beautifully they were painted. We can also notice that some small details were embroidered to kind of make them pop, highlight them. For example, the eye of the carp. We mentioned that there are lotus flowers on the kimono, and that's actually the second flower of today, so let's jump onto that. The lotus, in Japanese Hasu, is a flower which blooms in summer. Its plant is kind of special because it has evolved in a way which can survive in slow flowing rivers and ponds, in general water basins. The roots are attached onto the bottom of these bodies of water, and then the plant goes up through the water, and the blooms, the flowers and the leaves, they float above the surface of the water. We can imagine that where the roots grow, it's muddy, and the water in such bodies of water that are kind of still like ponds is not always exactly crystal clear. Yet the lotus blooms clean leaf with beautiful immaculate flowers. And for this reason, it has been taken up as a religious symbol because it's able to stem from the soil to go through all earthly realms and go up through the air without being contaminated. And so it has become a religious symbol both in the Hindu religion and in the Buddhist religion. And so we can see that this pond with lotus flowers and carps is actually can be read as a religious motif. And going back to the kimono, in fact, we know that the original owner of this garment wore it in occasion of a ritual practice. She wore it during her Jusan Mairi at the age of 13 around the year 1876. The Jusan Mairi is a religious ceremony in which 13-year-olds go to the Buddhist temple and they thank for their coming of age and they pray for future health and happiness. The owner of this garment, we know that she specifically went to the Arashiyama Horinji temple in Saga in Kyoto. And she was actually part of a family of textile workers. She was the fourth generation female textile worker of this family, and we can see that there is her family crest onto the kimono. So we can imagine that this visit must have been important for them, both for her and her family, if they decided to wear such a beautiful and elegant and sophisticated garment on this occasion. Buddhism features a variety of sacred texts, and one of these types of text, it's called sutra. Sutra are often considered to express the word of Buddha and to contain everything one needs for achieving the enlightenment. This box that we are looking at is a kyopako, a box made to contain sutra, because of course these texts were written and so they had to be stored somewhere. It is decorated with a design of lotus flowers in a pond, which, as we just said, is a religious motif. And we can see how beautifully the box is decorated. The lotus flowers are depicted at different stages of their lives. So we can see some lotus leaves still rolled up, they're very young, they're not opened up yet. And then we can see some older leaves which actually are covered in spots, holes, because they've been there a while. The golden decoration was achieved by using a variety of techniques. This included maki-e, which means dusting wet lacquer with gold powder in order to create a flat design, as well as togidashi maki-e, which means applying gold powder, covering it with black lacquer and then polishing the black lacquer off in order to reveal the golden decoration again. And then lastly, nashiji maki-e, which is a sprinkling of small irregular flakes of gold foil which are suspended at varying angles in many layers of translucent lacquer. Now, the combination of all these techniques required some elements which are in general required when working with lacquer, which is very high skills by part of the craftsman, precious materials, and a lot of time and patience, which makes this box very precious, and it seems befitting because it was made to contain holy texts. Let's look at another object, one last object related to the lotus flower and Buddhism. It's a Japanese sword guard tsuba made in brass and dated to the mid to late 19th century. The tsuba is in the shape of a lotus flower and we can see that it depicts a bodhisattva canon. Let's remember that bodhisattva are humans which are able to achieve enlightenment, they are able to achieve the nirvana, but they decided not to do so because their aim is to help humanity, to help other people in achieving the nirvana as well. And for this they are showing incredible compassion, and of course they are beloved and venerated by Buddhist practitioners. Especially Kannon is known as the Bodhisattva of compassion. Kannon was especially beloved, and this Bodhisattva was represented in an innumerable ways, innumerable kinds of representations. This one specifically is white-robed Kannon, which is actually an image which was favored and beloved by the practitioners of Zen Buddhism. In fact, Zen practitioners beloved white-robed Kannon because it was seen as it embodied the ideal of Zen meditation, and they favored Kannon more for its contemplative life rather than its traditional ideal of compassion. White-robed Kannon was often represented in ink painting, usually monochrome black ink with shades of grey, and its white robes usually stood out and were bright compared to the background. We can kind of see the same effect onto this tsuba, because the tsuba is in brass. The lotus leaf onto which Kannon is sitting is actually kind of brownish. It's an old leaf, we can tell, because it has spots and holes. But Kannon is depicted in a very bright, more golden color, so it actually stands out, has kind of the same contrast as in the paintings. The leaf is also depicted beautifully. We can see that at the edges it's rounding up, and we can see the other side with the vernatures of the leaf. Let's quickly look at the inscription which is found onto the sword guard. In fact, the maker has signed its work. This is kind of not always, but it's standard for the sword fittings. And we can see that it was signed by a Hamano Noriyuki I, who signed himself as a Buddhist practitioner and dated the making of this sword guard to the Meiwa era, specifically to the year 1769. Hamano Noriyuki I was a smith which specialized in sword fittings and was active in the middle of the Edo period. Let's briefly talk about a fruit tree that blooms in summer. It's a Tachibana, a Japanese citrus fruit, kind of like a mandarin. This tree grows wild in Japan and was beloved by poems because it blooms in summer and its perfume was amazing. We can see Tachibana mandarins on this uchikake outer robe. This garment was worn over the kimono, open, and was a winter garment because it kept you warm, was kind of thick, kept you warm on top of your other garments. The habit of wearing it open onto other robes was started in the Kamakura period by women which belonged to families of the warrior class, but eventually became popular also in the general population. And this specifically is a wedding uchikake, which was meant to be worn over a wedding kimono. And it is dated to either the late 18th century or the early 19th century. We have actually seen an uchikake before. I don't know if you remember, but in the first video of this series, in the autumn video, we did look at a beautiful uchikake from the collection of the Met Museum. If you don't remember it, why not checking it out? Just saying. Because it is a wedding uchikake, it features a variety of auspicious motifs all over it. So let's have a look. First, of course, it's the mandarin. The use of the Tachibana motif actually started already in the Heian period, but the mandarin was popular as an auspicious fruit since the ancient times. In fact, already in the imperial collection of poems, the Kojiki, the Tachibana is talked about, and it is described as a plant that grows wildly in the land of Toyoko, which was a kind of paradise of immortality. In fact, a characteristic of the Tachibana is that they are green all year round, and for this reason they have kind of come to represent this immortality or longevity and in general health. having it onto a wedding uchikake is very auspicious because not only it wishes for a long life, but also one can imagine for a long-lasting union, a long-lasting marriage. The mandarins onto the uchikake were achieved by using a technique of tie-dye in Japanese called shibori. However, we can also see that there are other parts of the plant that were achieved by using other techniques. For example, we can see golden leaves and white embroidered blooms of the plant. This is because it was believed that the Tachibana, which grew in this land of Toyoko, had at the same time blooms, leaves and fruits, and that's why they are represented onto the uchikake. We also see a decoration of paper butterflies. Paper butterflies were traditionally attached onto strips of paper and were attached to gifts. And then eventually they became also an auspicious motif because butterfly is called cho in Japanese. Cho is also the reading for a Chinese character, a kanji, which is nagai, which means long. So of course, again we see this idea of long, of longevity, and that's why we see butterflies represented onto this uchikake. The next flower that we are looking at today is considered in China and Japan the king of all flowers. It is the peony. The peonies were beloved in China. They were at first attached to ideas of female beauty and sensuality. However, they were also adopted by the literati gentlemen, government officials for whom the peony came to represent an ambition for a promotion to higher offices. Peonies were imported from China into Japan around the 8th century, and immediately they started being cultivated. And as we have also seen with the morning glory, we talked about it earlier, they started being cultivated by selecting the best flowers and creating ever and ever bigger blooms. Peonies are actually quite common when it comes to material culture in the equipment of the samurai warriors, and they have come to stand for bravery and excellence in the martial arts. We can see an example of this onto this pair of stirrups, which are dated to the 18th century and are signed by a Sanemitsu, the craftsman who created them. Unfortunately, we don't know much else about Sanemitsu. But we can look at his work. It's truly beautiful. The stirrups were made with wood and iron, and they were decorated by an inlaid silver decoration which depicts a motif of peonies, waves and Chinese lion, shishi. The stirrups also feature a kind of unique decorative element which are raised dots which kind of highlight the whole decoration and brighten it up. These are not really found anywhere else. So they kind of tell us that Sanemitsu was an excellent craftsman but also had a very creative attitude to create such unique decoration. The combination of Chinese lions and peonies is actually quite common on samurai equipment. So let's look at another object from samurai warriors which features them. It's a samurai sword guard tsuba made of brass. And we can see that it features peonies on the left side and the Chinese lion on the right. If we look closely, we can actually see that the Chinese lion is only represented like half of its body because it's actually going through the Hitsuhana hole, well, one of the two Hitsuhana holes, which are holes for scabbard accessories. And what happens if we actually turn the tsuba? Yes, we can see the other half of the lion, it's behind as it's going through the hole. I think this is just the most precious detail and I love it. We can see that in general on the rest of the backside of the tsuba there's a few rocks, kind of renditions of the landscape. And if we turn the tsuba around again, we can just look closely. We can also, on the sorga, we can see a signature. It's a signature of the maker, which was craftsman Tsu Jinpo, art name Hachi, who was a craftsman based in Edo. In the religious Buddhist field, the Chinese lions and peonies are actually a reference to a Chinese mountain, the Mount Tiantai, which is a famous mountain. It really exists, but it's tied to creation myths. And it's also the location of the headquarters of a Buddhist sect known as Chantai, in Japanese Tendai sect. And for this reason, because of the headquarters of this Buddhist temple, of this Buddhist sect, the mountain was also a place of pilgrimage for Japanese Buddhists. Now, to reach the mountain, one has to cross a bridge, a stone bridge, in Chinese Chao. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. And this bridge with onto a cliff is actually also tied to a legend which is connects us to the motif of the Chinese lions. In fact, this legend tells of a lioness which would throw her cubs off the cliff and was willing to feed and care for only for the cubs that actually had the physical strength and the moral resolve to climb back onto the cliff. This legend was incorporated into Japanese pop culture in a way, theater culture, because it was the inspiration for a no play which was called Shakyo, the stone bridge, and also for a variety of kabuki plays. These kabuki plays all featured Chinese lions dancing in front of peonies, and that's how it all comes together in a way. This motif of Chinese lions and peonies and how it is connected to China and to the Mount Tiantai. Let's talk very briefly about a flower which is very beloved in Asia. However, it only started appearing in Japanese arts kind of in the pre-modern era. It is the hibiscus, Bussoge in Japanese. This plant is represented in woodblock prints, and it was a motif, a subject especially beloved by Hiroshige, the famous woodblock print master. He depicted it in a number of woodblock prints, always accompanied by a bird. So let's look at an example of these woodblock prints. It's a hibiscus and a sparrow, dated to 1834. The hibiscus is represented beautifully. The woodblock print is in vertical format and the plant kind of crosses it diagonally in a curvy shape. I think it's really beautiful. We can see towards the bottom there's fully bloomed flowers, while at the top, at the extremity of the branch, it's more like still closed buds. Near the buds, at the top, we see the sparrow with its wings open, and the sparrow is actually surrounded by characters of a poem. It reads, "At dawn, wet with dew, it falls, the hibiscus flower." This poem actually references the delicate nature of the hibiscus flowers. In fact, hibiscus tend to bloom in the morning and then they die in the evening of the same day. They have a very short lifespan as a flower. However, when it comes to autumn, towards the end of summer, they become even more delicate and they can die even in the morning of the same day that they are blooming. According to the literature, to the poems, it's because of the weight of the dew. We've almost made it. Let's look at the last plant about which I want to talk in this video, the last plant of summer. It's kind of regal and elegant tree, which I think is befitting for the end. It's the paulownia tree, in Japanese, Kiri. The Kiri grows with a thin trunk and has a kind of large palm leaf shaped leaves and blooms in pyramid shaped vertical clusters of flowers, which are kind of lilac in color. We can see the motif of paulownia leaves and flowers depicted onto this lacquered tea caddy, which is dated to the 17th century. This is a small yet exquisite object, and it kind of also has a unique, not unique, but in a way almost eccentric decoration, because we can see it's almost as if it was split in half by a diagonal line, and it features two different decorations. This kind of decoration with a motif of paulownia and chrysanthemum is actually linked to Japanese warrior leader Toyotomi Hideyoshi. I'm sure you've heard of him. After his death, his wife had a shrine built for him at the Kodaiji temple. Inside the shrine, not only were the walls covered with lacquer, but there was also a set of about 30 objects for personal use, which were made with lacquer, and they feature this motif of autumn grasses with black with a gold decoration, and also featured, of course, the paulownia leaves and flowers, which was actually the crest for the Toyotomi family. And so the decoration style came to be known as Kodaiji. So we can see this style on this tea caddy. In fact, we can see on the left the paulownia leaves and blooms, which are depicted in gold onto a black background. And on the other half, we see chrysanthemum flowers, which are actually a plant of autumn. As we mentioned earlier, lacquer is an intense work which requires precision and skills and time and precious materials. So once again, we can see a small object which holds a great value. Let's look at one last object for today's video, kind of finally. It's a beautiful painted screen from Tosa Mitsuyoshi, dated to the 16th century. Japanese screens are called yobun, and they had a double use. One was a practical use. In fact, they were used, for example, to divide spaces temporarily. For example, to create a more private sleeping area or changing area. And also, they blocked the breeze, which kept rooms warmer, especially during winter. But they also had a decorative use. In fact, they were beautifully painted, beautifully decorated, and when they featured the golden background, they also glimmered with light, so that's very beautiful. Our screen is from the 16th century, from the Momoyama period. Quite a coincidence, this is also the period in which Toyotomi Hideyoshi ruled, and it was at this time that we saw a kind of change in art and a preference for kind of opulent, rich artworks, which often were housed in the mansions and fortresses of samurai warriors. In this case, this is what we see on our screen, which kind of materializes this style. In fact, we see a golden background and bright, bold colors. Tosa Mitsuyoshi also materializes the style of the Tosa school of painting, kind of flat decorative compositions, fine line work and great attention to detail, and a kind of brilliant color. All of these characteristics, especially the gold background and the fine line work and the bright colors, go against a previous trend in Japanese art, which was influenced by Chinese painting, which featured a lot of monochrome ink painting. If we look at the screen, we can see the plants on the sides, we can see paulownia trees and also bamboo, while more towards the center, not exactly in the center, more center right and center left, we can see two phoenixes and two peacocks. The phoenix is a legendary creature. Its motif, its legends came from China, and it had this symbolic meaning of auspicious political meaning, because it is said that the phoenix does not reside on earth, it resides in the heavens. But it comes on earth when a great leader is about to appear. And when it comes, it actually nests on paulownia trees and eats bamboo leaves. And that's why we see it on this screen. We can see the bamboo trunks, the paulownia trees, and the phoenix. There is one detail that I would like to show you about this screen, is that it represents multiple seasons at the same time, and so it kind of represents the flowing of time. In fact, if we look on the left side, the paulownia tree is in bloom, and so are the weeds and the plants on the ground. But if we look on the right side, the tree is bare, and so are the plants on the ground. So what we see is that summer and winter are coexisting in the same screen. It's a kind of passage of time. And I thought this was a good note to end our series about the seasons, a kind of small recap of this idea. So I will conclude the video here. Thank you for watching. As always, I hope you enjoy talking about summer plants. If you haven't seen my other videos about autumn, winter and spring and so on, I will link them here at the end. Make sure to check them out if you'd like. And as always, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel. I hope more videos will be coming soon now that I'm back in the swing of things. And I'd love it if you wrote me a comment or left a question. I always like reading those. And if you enjoyed the video and you would like to leave me a tip, you can do that on the Ko-Fi website. I will put a link in the description. For now, I just thank you for watching and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!